brought me here. Written by E.G. Rand.
Please let me go.
The boy, almost a man, but still a boy, cowered before the eldritch figure. The black form rose above the shattered candles and sigils carved in the forest floor. 6 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet, soon towering above the ruins of the old wooden church, a tangle of black horns silhouetted against the starry sky. The creature's luminous eyes were hunter-locked on the boy's white face. All around them the woods were dark, a half-moon cowering among the tree branches. The boy couldn't see the bodies of his companions, only parts. Glimpses of limp hands, black blood-matted hair, and strips of flesh that now hung from low branches, swaying in the wind.
Please let me go.
He whispered again, lips numb with fear. The figure turned its massive, bony head as if considering the request. It chattered unseen teeth. When it spoke, it used a voice that was almost human, but distorted, as if it came from a metallic well.
I can't just let you go. You brought me here. I can't just let you go. But perhaps we can enter a contract.
Parenting a tween is hard. Meredith understood what her son was going through. She had been a teenager once. She knew that a certain amount of contempt for adults around you was normal. Troy had experienced so many upheavals recently. A new stepdad, a new town, a new baby brother. Meredith knew that some rebellion was to be expected. But did he have to be such a turd about it? "How old is the baby?" the grocery store cashier asked as she beamed at Gideon. From his baby carrier, Gideon smiled back, a rosy picture of health. 14 months, Meredith said with obvious pride as she pulled her credit card from her purse. "Jesus Christ, Mom," groaned Troy, leaning on the shopping cart as if pulled to the earth by the idiocy surrounding him. "Just say he's a year old. Counting in months makes you sound like an idiot." The checkout lady's smile disappeared. She quickly rang up the rest of the groceries. Once they were back in the car, Meredith rounded on Troy. "Why do you talk to me like that?" she snapped. Troy stared at his phone, silent. Meredith gritted her teeth. She pictured what would have happened if she had embarrassed her mother like that. She could feel the ghost of red welts rising on her face. When they got home, Troy disappeared to his room, leaving Meredith to carry in the groceries one-handed because Gideon refused to be put down for even a second. When Aaron was home, he always insisted that Meredith refrain from picking up their infant son when he fussed. Aaron said that she should let Gideon cry it out. Meredith believed this method to be more of an excuse to ignore the baby than an actual parenting technique. Besides, she liked carrying Gideon around with her, even if he was as heavy as a butterball turkey. Meredith wished Aaron was here. Marrying a trucker meant lots of nights alone, and she knew that. But Meredith had been naive in the halcyon glow of their early relationship. She believed they could make it all work. A husband for her, a father figure for Troy, and a baby to raise in a real home, happily ever after. The end. But Troy was having none of it. Troy liked Aaron at first, back when he was Mommy's friend who brought him firecrackers and video games. But as soon as Aaron and Meredith got serious, Troy flipped. The fights were endless. Troy insisted that he already had a father. Meredith pointed out that 2 half-assed phone calls a year did not constitute a close and loving relationship. After that, Troy had retreated into himself. He sulked through their whole wedding, refusing to smile for any pictures. The ice-out became worse when Meredith got pregnant with Gideon. She had tried to break the news gently and had even gotten Troy a Best Big Brother shirt and mug. Again, naive. Troy had thrown the shirt at her, disgusted. She found the mug shattered on the flagstone outside his window. Since then, Troy had only gotten worse, especially towards his mother. They had been so close when it was just the two of them. Now the contempt radiated off him in waves. It seemed there was nothing Meredith could do right in his eyes. Meredith did the dishes with Gideon strapped to her back. Gideon gurgled from his baby sling, happily yanking a fistful of hair. She smiled at the reflection in the dark window above the sink. Mommy and baby in domestic bliss. Gideon pistoned his fat legs, grinning. Meredith glowed with love, and not for the first time wondered how Troy stayed so cold towards his beautiful baby brother. Meredith had hoped that Troy, if not excited for the new sibling, could at least be nice. But the contempt for his mother was matched by complete indifference towards Gideon. Troy never offered to hold Gideon, ignored all his charming coos and infectious giggles. Troy looked right through the baby, only cognizant enough to make snide remarks. After putting Gideon to bed, Meredith braved the hallway to her oldest son's bedroom. Music that sounded like a car crusher on fire emanated from the closed door. She knocked, the music turned off, and Troy appeared. The musky odor of his room, stale food, BO, a hint of body spray and energy drinks, wafted out. It was dark except for the screen of his cell phone, which casted a ghastly green glow over the disheveled bed and overflowing hamper. Time to go to bed. Meredith gritted her teeth, prepared for a battle of wills. To her surprise, Troy hugged her. I'm sorry for being a dick at the grocery store, Troy muttered from under a curtain of dyed black hair. Meredith allowed Troy to dye his hair, paint his nails black, and buy whatever clothes he wanted. She wanted him to be able to express himself. Meredith said it was all right. Troy's phone had gotten her attention. The screen was pinging over and over, multiple messages shooting up at once. Who are you texting? Meredith asked. New friends from school. Meredith felt a surge of emotions. She was thrilled to hear that Troy had made friends. It was hard to meet people in a new town at any age, let alone the formative middle school years. But the sweetness had a bitter undertaste. The phone pinged over and over in the darkness, a beacon to something she didn't know or understand. Strangers, reaching out to her son, talking to him, and listening to the thoughts and feelings that swirled beneath the surface of his mind, now alien to her. The day started out a winner. Gideon had slept through the night, and Troy went off to school with minimal histrionics. The morning went so well that Meredith even had time for an iced coffee before her Mommy and Me class. She arrived at the gymboree feeling great, toting Gideon like a trophy. It was the normal group of moms standing around, holding squirming toddlers and rocking strollers. They all stopped talking when Meredith walked in. The moms passed knowing, worried looks to each other, and Meredith's good mood plummeted. Charlotte Tyrell, the neighborhood evangelist and busybody, approached her.
Honey, I'm sorry to say I have some bad news for you.
Charlotte placed a cold hand on Meredith's elbow as she spoke.
Your oldest, Troy, right? The one with the dyed black hair?
Charlotte's voice was polite, but nonetheless conveyed disgust with Meredith's parenting choices. Meredith nodded, mouth dry.
Well, he has fallen in with a bad crowd. A real bad crowd.
Charlotte looked around the room, the other moms nodding eagerly back at her. Normally, Meredith would be furious to be ambushed like this, but all she could think of was Troy's phone, pinging in the dark of his bedroom.
I seen him with the Haywood boys, said Sarah, one of Charlotte's acolytes. They were hanging out together in Sanders Preserve, sneaking around. Well, what's wrong with that?
Said Meredith, clutching Gideon to her like a life vest. She had no idea who the Haywood boys were, but Sanders Preserve was a lush park spanning several acres. It didn't seem like the kind of place boys went to get into trouble.
The Haywood boys are scum,
sniffed Charlotte.
The two older boys went to juvie for selling drugs and God knows what else. The younger two are never in school, always getting into trouble. They're devil worshippers, blurted Sarah, eyes bulging. They perform black mass at that old Wildwood church.
The crowd of moms nodded in agreement, murmuring. Meredith felt herself flush. She eyed the door. Where the hell was the class instructor?
What's Wildwood Church? She asked. The Sanders Preserve is on top of an old town. The Wildwood Church was for the blacks. It burned down in 1938.
A mousy woman muttered from the crowd. She had the decency to look embarrassed. Sarah piped up again.
Why would your son be hanging around in a burned-down Negro church unless he... Negro church? Sneered Meredith. Maybe my son is just interested in the black history of this town, seeing as his grandmother, my mother, was a black woman. Or, as you would say, Negro?
Meredith snarled. The room fell silent. The Greek chorus of mothers went from eager speciation to examining their shoes in seconds. Charlotte Tyrell looked like she had sucked on a lemon. At that moment, the instructor strolled in, a cheery greeting dying on her lips in the tense silence. Meredith buzzed home in a black cloud of fury. Gideon, sensing the tension, fussed in his car seat. Once inside the house, Meredith discovered that Troy had already come and gone. She knew he had been there because there were Twizzler wrappers all over the couch and empty energy drink cans on the side of the sink. She slammed the cans into the recycling bin, wincing at the smell. She hated energy drinks. School had ended over an hour ago. Where was he? Was he out with those so-called Satan worshippers? Meredith tried not to think about it, but of course that only made her think about it more. When she put Gideon down for his nap, Meredith decided to search her son's room. It took her a moment to adjust to the smell, which was more pungent in the heat of the afternoon. Meredith had stopped cleaning for Troy years ago, and it wasn't a problem before. He used to be such a neat boy. But like everything else, that had changed when they moved. She sorted through the cups, crusty bowls, and energy drink cans. Finally, Meredith came across a book. Troy wasn't a big reader, so that alone was unusual. The book was bound in red leather. The title was in a language she didn't understand. The cover featured a capering devil with split feet, ram's horns, and leathery bat wings. Black blood dripped from its pointed fangs. Meredith flipped through the pages. It was all in the same language, but there were pictures. Medieval woodcuttings of demons like the ones on the cover. Swooping wings and snarling fangs, faces twisted like church gargoyles. There were also images of torture, flayed people, their mouths open in agony. People stretched over wooden wheels, being burned alive while devils danced in the flames. It looked like a book about Satan worship. Meredith dropped the book. She turned around and left, slamming the door behind her. The sound woke Gideon with a wail. As she sat in the nursery, Gideon asleep on her shoulder, Meredith started talking herself down. It was just a book, right? A book with some creepy drawings in a language that neither she nor her son spoke. Meredith was sure that this book was nothing more than a weird novelty. Troy was probably just a little morbid, no different from people who take tours of castle dungeons or watch horror movies. There's nothing wrong with that. Charlotte Tyrell and her racist buddies could sit and spin, as far as she was concerned. But Troy had never been interested in the occult before. Why now? And who gave the book to him? The accusations still buzzed in Meredith's ears. Where was Troy anyway? She assumed he had gone to the corner store to get more odious beverages, but surely that wouldn't take this long. Meredith got out her phone and called Troy. The line rang twice, then went dead. When she called back, it went right to voicemail. She called several times over the next hours, each one going to voicemail. With each unanswered hour, her panic mounted. By the time Meredith put Gideon to bed, she was frantic. She considered calling both her husband and the police, but neither seemed like a good idea. Aaron wouldn't be able to help, being thousands of miles away, and her calling outside of their normal time would just worry him. As for the police, well, if the neighborhood moms were any indication, the local PD wouldn't be interested in looking for her son. Only 3 months in a new town, and he was already an outcast and a devil worshiper. Meredith paced the hall as the hours crept by. Finally, exhausted and out of her mind with worry, she collapsed in an armchair by the front door. Meredith woke up with a start when the door slammed open. By the time she knew what was going on, Troy was already throwing the locks back into place, slamming the chain they never use. He turned on the light in the hallway, illuminating his filthy, tattered clothing. The blood splattered across his face and the front of his jeans. She looked at the clock. 4 a.m. "What the f—" she began. Troy leapt across the room. He clamped a hand over his mother's mouth that smelled of dirt and fire. The gesture sent her into a rage. Meredith reeled back and slapped the boy across the face. "What the hell is wrong with you?" She screamed, shades of her mother flying from her mouth. "It is 4 a.m. Where the fuck have you been?" Troy jumped to his feet, staring out the windows as if checking to see if someone had followed him. He seemed to barely notice the slap. In the light from the hallway, Meredith saw his face for the first time. Troy was pale with fear. Her handprint raised red against Troy's bloodless face, his bulging, dark eyes. Troy began darting around the room, turning on all the lights, completely ignoring his mother. Meredith stared at him, horrified. "Drugs?" she muttered.
Troy, are you on drugs?
Troy looked at her, and for a moment his face was back to the usual incredulous annoyance. Meredith was awake enough now to see that Troy's eyes, though wide and terrified, were not red or hazy. His panic was sharp, focused. A piercing scream came down the stairs. All the noise woke up Gideon. Troy didn't seem to notice that either. He was now turning on all the lights in the kitchen and double-checking the lock on the back door. The wails intensified. Meredith got to her feet, but before she mounted the stairs, she collared Troy, who was staring out the window into the night.
We are going to talk about this tomorrow morning, and you better have some answers for me.
Troy nodded, but his eyes never left the window.
And turn all these damn lights off!
She snapped before going upstairs and slamming the door to the nursery, causing the baby to howl anew. It took Meredith the better part of an hour to get Gideon back to sleep. Her being so upset didn't help, but at least Troy was home safe, and soon the ever-present exhaustion of having an infant got to her. Meredith passed out on a yoga mat next to the crib. In the morning, she awoke to Gideon's happy gurgles and beams of sun crossing the nursery ceiling. Meredith stumbled to her feet, and as she prepared Gideon for the day, the night before came back to her. The image of Troy's white, frightened face and clear eyes hung before her like a ghost. He must have been up to no good with these new friends of his. Whatever he was doing, she would have to put a stop to it. Meredith winced when thought about coming down hard on Troy. She had never been a disciplinarian. The whole thing made her sick to her stomach. When Meredith came downstairs, she was surprised to be greeted by the smell of brewing coffee. Troy sat at the kitchen counter, mug in hand, staring blankly out the window. He had showered and changed his clothes, now wearing clean flannel PJs, still crisp from the drawer. Meredith strode into the kitchen, thumped Gideon into his high chair, and warmed up his oatmeal. Once that was done, she poured herself a cup of coffee and rounded on her oldest son.
Explain.
Troy looked at her through his dark hair.
I went out with some friends after school. We went to that big park. Sanders Preserve,
Meredith said, and found the shocked look on her son's face very gratifying.
How did you... Oh, I know what you've been up to, she spat, hating how much she sounded like her own mother. It's all over town. What I still don't know is why you thought it was okay to break curfew. And why didn't you answer my calls?
I got lost, Troy whispered, not meeting her eye. It got dark, and I dropped my phone somewhere. I got separated from my friends.
Those Haywood kids?
She asked. Troy nodded slowly, still not meeting her eyes.
You aren't going to hang out with them anymore. You hear me? I forbid it.
To her surprise, Troy chuckled. It was a joyless sound. No problems there.
Good,
she spat. Gideon flung the plastic oatmeal bowl onto the floor, splattering remnants down the hall.
And I am not buying you another phone. Not until your birthday, at least. You need to learn something from this. Got it?
Troy nodded again, shoulders slumped. His lack of reaction aroused Meredith's suspicion. The last time she refused to replace a broken phone, the ensuing argument almost took the roof off. Now, Troy was facing over 2 months without a phone, and he didn't give a shit. He almost seemed relieved. Gideon, now finished with his breakfast, began screaming to be held. Troy took it as his cue to leave, pushing away from the kitchen island.
Not so fast," Meredith said, slinging Gideon over her shoulder. "Why were you covered in blood?" "I fell, hurt myself." Troy pulled up the sleeve of his arm to reveal a poorly taped bandage, at least 5 inches down his forearm. It was a skin injury, like road rash, painful but not something that could be fixed with stitches. Nor did it explain the quantity of blood. Part of Meredith wanted to believe that Troy's story was true. It's believable enough. Local asshole kids lure the new guy to the haunted woods and leave him there. Maybe they also stole his phone. It's the sort of thing that asshole kids do. But there was something in Troy's furtive demeanor, his sidelong glances at her face, his hung head. Guilt clung to him like the sweet smell of smoke. "You're grounded for the weekend. Put your laptop in my room before you go to bed." "You're lucky it's Saturday, because I would have made your tired ass go to school. I would have made you walk there. And don't you dare mention this to Aaron on our call tomorrow. Driving 14 days straight is hard enough." Troy nodded, and Meredith hoped that was the end of it. It wasn't. Over the coming days, Troy became increasingly paranoid. Despite being agnostic his entire life, Troy developed an obsession with religious iconography. Meredith came home from the grocery store the next day to find that Troy had hung crosses over every door of the home. Some were plastic things he had purchased from the corner store. Others were homemade using sticks, tongue depressors, and even pens roped together with tape and twine. Troy also began reading the Bible and scrawling Old Testament verses on the walls of his bedroom with a Sharpie. As if that wasn't bad enough, Troy had become fixated with his mother's bedroom as well as his own. Whenever possible, Troy snuck into Meredith's room to hang crosses over her bed, put Bibles under her pillow, and even started writing Bible verses on her walls. No amount of scolding subdued him, and Meredith had to start locking her bedroom door, something she hadn't done since Troy was a toddler. The only room that was spared from Troy's zealotry was the nursery. The scribbles and crosses spread across the walls like mold. Meredith didn't know how she was going to explain this to Aaron when he returned. In the following few days, Troy refused to leave the house for anything, especially at night. Getting him to go to school was a daily battle that sometimes ended in physical conflict. Meredith was furious, but more than that, she was worried. She found herself laying awake at night under the handmade crosses, Googling things like teen schizophrenia and religious fixation. To make matters worse, Gideon had sleep regression, and the only thing that soothed him was being held. Between her 2 boys, Meredith was lucky if she got 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep a night. This all came to a head a week after the late-night incident. Meredith got a call from Troy's school, where an efficient-sounding secretary informed her that her son had been absent the entire week. Meredith stood, stunned. She had watched him board the bus every single one of those days. After she hung up the phone, she stared up the dark stairwell to Troy's room, clutching Gideon. All she could think about was that book with the red devil, one inky black eye glinting up at her. She was going to have to do something. She was definitely going to have to get Aaron involved. Meredith had hoped they could sort this out without him, but she was officially out of her depth. She needed help. It took Meredith's sleep-deprived brain several seconds to register the ringing doorbell. Her stomach tied in knots as she opened the door.
Gideon fussing on her hip. A square-jawed police officer stood on her doorstep. He did not say hello. "Madam, we need to talk to Troy." Meredith looked past the cop's shoulder into the purple twilight. Everything was cast in long shadows. Meredith could see that another cop was sitting on the hood of the cruiser, one hand resting on the butt of his gun, eyes glinting in the dark. Meredith asked why they needed to talk to Troy. The cop handed her a missing persons poster. Lenny and Zeke Haywood, missing over a week now. Last seen the night Troy came home late and covered in blood. The cops said they had several witnesses who placed Troy with the Haywood boys on the night of their disappearance. They also said that they had witnessed Troy leaving school grounds, ducking into the woods and walking to Sanders Preserve almost every day this week. They could take him in on truancy, if nothing else. The officer said he was sorry to tell Meredith all this, but he didn't sound sorry. Meredith looked at the cops. She looked at the missing persons poster. She thought of Troy's blood-soaked clothes and the Gymboree moms. Gideon wailed like a siren in her ear as she looked at the cop car, a glistening beast in the night. She made a choice. "No," Meredith said. "You can't talk to my son. Come back with a warrant." She slammed the door in the cop's face. Meredith watched as the cop stood, silent, then retreated. She watched the squad car pull away. After she was sure it was gone, she sank, slowly behind the locked door. Her heart hammered in her chest. Gideon fussed and, like a sleepwalker, Meredith began putting him to bed. It wasn't until Gideon was asleep that the reality of the situation settled in. Rage, clean and bright, filled Meredith's stomach. She had tried so hard. Troy had a childhood most people, herself included, had only dreamed of. And for all that, this is how he repaid her? Enough was enough. Meredith had coddled her eldest son's bullshit for too long. She allowed Troy to make her feel guilty for being happy, and that gave him agency to do whatever he wanted. Well, if Troy thought he was going to punish her for starting a new family, he was wrong. Dead wrong. Meredith left the nursery. She was so angry she didn't even bother to turn the lights on going down the stairs, nearly colliding into Troy. He stood in the dark like a scarecrow, his rangy figure backlit by the streetlight. She could smell him. B.O. Unwashed clothes and rancid breath. Her rage reignited, but before she could start, he held up a hand to her. "You can't go upstairs." "Excuse me?" Meredith spat. Troy repeated himself, slowly, as if she had genuinely not heard him. Outside, something dark flickered across the streetlight. Meredith sputtered with rage, but Troy only shook his shaggy head, almost sadly. "No matter what you hear, you can't go upstairs. You have to stay here." Before Meredith could respond, a thunderous crack came from the nursery, followed by the tinkling of broken glass. Gideon's high wail of terror pierced the air. Meredith turned and ran up steps, making it to the hallway before Troy caught her, knocking her to the ground. From where she lay, Meredith could see a sliver of the nursery illuminated by the nightlight. She saw the broken glass covering the floor. She saw the thing that had entered her home. A massive creature, tall and terribly dark, loomed over Gideon's crib. Gideon shrieked in terror as the thing moved its bony head from side to side, chattering teeth. Meredith jumped for the crib, but Troy grabbed his mother's wrist and yanked her back. Her shoulder popped, and Meredith saw stars. She fell to her knees. Troy was screaming, telling her to stop. All Meredith could see was the long-fingered reptilian hand that reached into the crib. The creature lifted Gideon by one leg like a dead deer, and Meredith's screams harmonized with Gideon's mortal fear as his fat arms trembled, reaching for his mother. Troy twisted her arm, pinning her while repeating,
He wasn't just going to let me go, Mom. I had to give him something. I had to fulfill the contract. He wasn't just going to let me go. He wasn't just going to let me go, Mom. He wasn't just going to let me go. I had to give him something. I had to fulfill the contract. He wasn't just going to let me go. He wasn't just going to let me go. He wasn't gonna go, Mom.